Hi, so in this video, I'm going to show you how to use a behavior over time graph to help your students make a little bit more sense of the data that is included in the historical Hohokam story of Arizona's water history. So this behavior over time graph is something I just made in a simple Google slide, and it will be available for you in the Google slide templates for the unit. Um, but the point of it is you could easily make it yourself, and you could even just make it on your Zoom whiteboard, which is what I'm going to use here because I'm going to use the annotate tool. You could invite all of your students to annotate at one time if you like. That's even a possibility. So what I would do to start off this discussion is just to say we're going to make sense of what has happened to the water level over time. And I want you to think of this line here as the bottom of the river surface. So if you think about that and there's water in the river, that means that we would mark that dot up here, right? So if there's water in the river, we would have water there. If there's just a little water, we can have less. Sometimes the water goes even lower or just below the surface. So any of those things will work. All right, so that's how you're going to start, and then you're just going to think with your students about the story. So in the story, it starts just after 0 AD, and what was happening at that time? Well, the people were farming, and they were using the water from the river, and they started working with irrigation. And so the water was definitely in the river. And do you imagine that water stayed in the river all the way for a pretty long time? And do you imagine it always stayed exactly every single year? It flowed in the river all the time? It may not have. It may have kind of changed a little bit. So if you have many students, they can put many dots, or you can think, okay, now, and we talk about 1300, what was probably happening then? Maybe it went up even a little higher. All those things might have happened. And so there you go, you've got some water. And as a teacher, you can grab a line and you can even draw that line across, right? So that students can see. But we'll go back to our dots. And something happened. What sort of happened next? People lived in the area, the Hohokam, and then eventually the Oatam lived in this place. And all that time, there was water in the rivers. In 1877, Tucson becomes a city, and we start having wells. And so you can imagine that eventually, over time, the water table might have dropped. And sometimes it dropped quite a lot in one year. Sometimes it dropped just a little, but it dropped and dropped. So you and your students could talk about what might have happened here, and you can continue to connect your behavior over time graph line if you would like, so that they can see kind of how the graph would look. But one thing about behavior over time graphs, and this kind of graph in particular, is that it is, very qualitative in nature. You don't need to be precise. And I don't even have anything over here. So I might say over here, I might talk about what's happening in the river. So we might say, when it gets to this level, the water table is low, you need shallow wells. And then even later in history, we have deep wells dug by big drilling wells, big. So we might talk about those things, and we can label them on our axis if we want. And that water table kind of kept dropping and dropping until such a time as, well, we brought in the CAP. That's not mentioned in the story, but Central Arizona Project Canal came in, and that leveled off our use a little bit, and our groundwater pumping particularly. But then something else happened exciting in 2019, and that exciting thing was not really a change in the groundwater level, but we did start putting water in the river. And so that's wastewater, and it just sits in the river up here, which is fine. It's going to keep going. But also what that water is going to do is infiltrate into the groundwater system. And so we might even begin to see a nice little curve up eventually in our groundwater. So that's kind of the hope that we would have. So this is just a quick discussion tool. It doesn't need to be a beautiful graph, and it doesn't need to be super fancy, but it's a way for you and your students to collaborate on thinking and talking about the story and making sense of the science that comes with the history. so much.